The snow gave way beneath him with the faintest whisper, like parchment torn by careful fingers, and Jorge Núñez, geographer of Quito and connoisseur of mountain perils, felt himself sliding down the steep western shoulder of Parascotopetl before his startled brain could order his limbs to clutch at purchase. For one breathless instant, the crimson dawn above the peaks fractured into a kaleidoscope of shards. Then Canija, hard snow, gritty volcanic pumice, and jagged slate blurred together, rushing upward past his face as gravity claimed him with patient certainty. He spun once, twice saw the sky wheel, saw the ragged cone of Cotopaxi far to the north wearing its diadem of vaporand. Then the rampaging slope snatched the air from his lungs. A jut of obsidian snagged his rucksack and tore it free. His map tube bounced away, its precious contents scattering like pale butterflies before the gusting wind. Something within his shoulder wrenched. His field glasses sprang from their strap and vanished in the drumming spray of ice. Núñez cried out not in fear, but in a kind of appalled amazement that such a trivial misstep could unseat the deliberate rhythm he had labored up these heights for weeks to achieve. All the patient triangulations, the neat little sketches in his leather notebook, the careful measurement of passes and cols ruined in half a heartbeat. Momentum bore him beyond the shoulder, into a white chute that curved down toward the shadowed massif the locals called the Devil's Staircase. There the snow thinned, and ribs of raw stone stood like broken teeth. Núñez flung out his arms. His left hand grazed icy granite, shredding glove and skin. He twisted, belly scraping rock, his boots kicking sparks. The sensation of speed multiplied. And then he would recall later a sullen crack, a hollow inrush of chill ere the mountain simply dropped away. He fell through void. The chill burned. The wind howled in his ears like a monstrous conch. Stars lingered in the paling sky, and for an absurd moment he believed he might fly among them. Yet earth reclaimed him. First a spray of powder, then a heavy thud against crusted snow, and at last darkness as the world and his wits alike turned over and extinguished. He came to lying on a tilted shelf of ice, ribs protesting each breath with spear, troubled sharp reminders of mortality. Tameless pain, bright as sunlight, pulsed behind his eyes. He tasted iron, a knee throbbed, and one elbow felt altogether boneless. Yet he was alive and oddly suspended, it seemed, halfway between the realm of men and some deeper, secret basin hidden from ordinary routes of commerce. The shelf sloped into gloom. Far below, in a place where dawns rose, shoe-gold light pooled like wine, he glimpsed what appeared to be treetops' impossible greenery, given the altitude. A valley, then sunken within the encircling teeth of the Andes, preserved from frost by some freak of currents and craters. He remembered half, forgotten tales from muleteers over Aguardiente, a hidden land, cut off ages ago by avalanche and quake, peopled entirely by the blind. Meneos de los Ciegos, the country of the blind. Yet tales, he knew, wore many disguises. The cautionary shepherd's yarn, the missionary's pious exaggeration, the newspaper's convenient half-truth. Núñez was a rational manner disciple of Humboldt, Darwin, and that growing cadre of bold natural philosophers who believed no corner of the world should remain unmapped. Still, the thought stirred a superstitious thrill so often dismissed in modern salons deep in his chest. Shifting arthritically, he inventoried injuries. Blood clotted the torn glove, but the fingers responded when commanded. Shoulder, wrenched but not dislocated. Ribs, bruised but not broken, he hoped. Ankle, sore yet weight. Bearing with caution, he still had the ice axe lashed across his back. Astonishing fortune. But his supplies, food, water, sextant lay scattered across the slope like seeds cast to the wind. Retrieval would be suicide. Descent toward that mysterious valley, though treacherous, offered at least the prospect of shelter and perhaps game or stream. Núñez began the crawl downward. Each yard he tested with the axe, chipping steps where necessary. Thin sunlight seeped over the ridge behind him, painting amber halos on distant clouds. Condors circled in lazy gyres high overhead, indifferent arbiters of fate. By noon he reached the tree line, towering polylepis twisted into witch, like silhouettes, their cinnamon bark peeling in scrolls. Among roots he found pockets of soil warm with geothermal breath, from which sprouted violet gentians and crimson chuquiraga flowers that had no business thriving so near the snow line. It was as though nature, in a fit of secretive whimsy, had folded a corner of the lower montane forest up into these frozen altitudes and sealed it away. The slope eased further into a talus field carpeted with moss. Springs gurgled among stones. Núñez drank greedily, rinsed blood from his face, and splashed icy relief onto bruised joints. He paused to fashion a crude sling for his shoulder from a strip of shirt. Though hungry, he refused to gnaw raw moss better to conserve dignity, he told himself, even when dignity felt like a joke told at the wrong funeral. Descending again by zigzag, he discovered faint indications of a footpath. Terraces cut into the hillside, not by modern pick but by centuries of erosion once perhaps paved, now choked by lichen. Hoofprints? No too shallow. Bare human feet, perhaps. The notion unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He limped onward, and, near mid-afternoon, rounded a buttress of black lava to gaze at last upon the hidden plain. It lay bowl-like, some 4 leagues across, encircled by ramparts of pumice and basalt that rose sheer as walls forged by titans. Warm mist hovered above irrigated fields that shone emerald against volcanic dust. Somewhere unseen, a waterfall murmured bass notes. Birdsong threaded counterpoint in crystalline flutes. And there, scattered like pieces on a cosmic chessboard, stood round domed houses built of sun-bleached clay. Their design struck him immediately, windowless, doorways draped with woven reed mats, rudimentary yet harmonious, suggesting communal minds for whom external appearance mattered less than inward function. A sudden breeze carried up children's laughter, high and bright and curiously musical, untempered by the caution-sighted youngsters, learn when confronted by cliffs or thorn bushes. It rang out pure as if the very air had given birth to joy. Núñez felt an emotion akin to reverence, though tinged with a scholar's excitement. He had indeed stumbled upon Meneos de los Ciegos. He traced a switchback trail that curled down between cactus outcrops and terraces sprouting maize. At a midpoint he heard soft footfalls and froze. 2 goats, their bells mute, emerged from scrub, led by a youth in homespun poncho. The boy's eyes, open but filmed in pale blue opalescence, drifted without focus. Yet his gait was sure, guided by a slender stick tapping the path like a metronome. Núñez called a greeting in Quechua, the lingua franca of these Sierra hamlets, and raised a hand. The boy halted, his head cocked, listening. Núñez repeated the greeting, then Spanish, then a halting mixture. The boy responded in a language Núñez did not recognize, a curiously lilting tongue, its vowels elongated as though molded by melody rather than articulation. Núñez stepped closer. The boy's nostrils flared. He stiffened, as though catching an unfamiliar scent. Nonetheless, curiosity overcame caution. He advanced, free hand extended. His fingers found Núñez's torn sleeve, traced along until they encountered crusted blood. They paused fractionally, perhaps marking strangeness, then resumed, mapping the foreigner's outline with quick, feather-light passes. Núñez allowed the examination, resisting the absurd urge to flinch. Jorge Núñez, he pronounced carefully, thumping his chest. The boy cocked his head again, repeated something approximating Núñez, and smiled, revealing perfect white teeth. Then, motioning with staff, he beckoned the stranger onward. Thus escorted, Núñez descended to the valley floor. The first hamlet lay among terraces where sightless farmers weeded by touch, their deft hands distinguishing seedlings from imposter sprouts with astonishing precision. Goat keepers navigated labyrinths of irrigation ditches guided by faint echoes cast from cupped palms. The world mute in color to these dwellers steamed instead with textures and rhythms, the hush of corn leaves in wind, the percussion of hooves on packed earth, the microtonal chorus of insects. Núñez's boots alone, crunching gravel, marked him alien. A cluster of adults gathered as the boy announced his arrival in their musical tongue. Faces turned toward Núñez with placid wonder. They reached forth gently, as cats sniffing unknown fragrance. He submitted again to tactile inspection. The shape of his beard, sweat, slick hair, foreign cloth. A man slightly older than himself, brawny, with cheeks bronzed by sun and scars mapping brow like stray constellations, seemed spokesman. Jacob, Núñez inferred from repeated utterance. Jacob addressed him in slow, measured phrases. Núñez, whose ear had grown attuned to dialectic shifts from expeditions among Quechua, Cayapa, and Jivaro tribals, discerned familiar root words mutated by isolation. It was an evolutionary tapestry of speech, as unique as the orchids Darwin admired on Galapagos. Through gestures and patient listening, he pieced together fragments. Outsider, from the rocks above, wounded. He replied in simplified Spanish, garnished with Quechua nouns, then mimicked climbing and falling. Jacob's brow furrowed. The villagers conversed among themselves with voices pitched between flute and drum, a music of thought. At length, Jacob guided Núñez toward a domed house. Reeds parted. Warm air smelling faintly of fermented maize enveloped him. Cool hands supported him to a pallet of llama skin. A girl no more than 18. Her long hair woven with beads dabbed his torn brow with cloth steeped in herbal infusion pungent of coca and valerian. She was Medina Sarate, that name he caught as syllables tumbled about the room like playful stones. Her fingers, quick and gentle, felt out the edges of every bruise, applied poultice, and bound linen with a competence rivaling the nurses of Quito's new Pasteur hospital. Núñez, half delirious with fatigue, murmured gratitude. She answered with a hum, a phrase perhaps meaning hush. Night drifted in quietly, not as the extinguishing of vision, but the deepening of cicada rhythm and the distant roar of unseen cataract. Medina Sarate lit no lamp. Light meant nothing here. Instead, she set beside him a clay cup of thick broth scented with quinoa and mountain herbs. Núñez sipped, warmth unfolding through limbs. Around him, domestic sounds, a spindle whirring, children rehearsing a memory game with pebbles clicked upon floor, an old man recounting history in slow cadence, each event, punctuated by communal breaths of awe. It struck Núñez like an epiphany. Culture did not reside in parchment archives or marble libraries. It lived in tongues and ears, passed hand to hand like an heirloom bowl. As exhaustion claimed him, he recalled words penned by his mentor, Dr. Llorente. The map is never the country. The lines we draw on paper are but vanishing echoes of realities far stranger than our philosophies. Drifted on that thought, Núñez slipped into dreams where Andean summits bent low to whisper counsel, and blind children plucked starlight as though it were spun sugar. He woke to dawn's subtle warmth upon his cheek, yet within the house, darkness reigned unchanged. Outside, villagers stirred. Someone tuned a flute carved from condor bone. The notes rose crisp, delineating the valley's contours for listening ears. Medina Sarate entered, gliding like a spirit, and presented him with a walking staff of polished quinoa stalk. She pressed his palm around it, as though conveying not merely wood, but a covenant. Here, stranger, is balance. Do not squander it. Days passed in a hush of recovery. Though ribs ached, Núñez insisted on exploring. Jacob allotted Pedro, a wiry youth, as guide. Pedro grasped Núñez's elbow lightly, steering him with minimal pressure. Together, they traversed orchards of cherimoya and groves of tree tomato scrops, thriving thanks to soil enriched by ancient eruption and microclimate, warmed by fumaroles that ghosted steam like kettle spouts. Everywhere irrigation channels babbled, traced by bare feet calibrating depth through temperature and sound. Children learned to differentiate velocity of flow in early schooling. Pedro explained each pitch corresponding to a particular field's thirst. Language lessons evolved organically. Núñez repeated phrases until Pedro chuckled approval. Pedro attempted Spanish, mangling consonants amusingly. Within a fortnight, they conversed haltingly. Núñez discovered the people called themselves Intitu children of the valley sun, though the word sun meant to them warmth and cycle, not brilliance. They recognized the concept of light abstractly, as one might conceive of magnetism, intangible, inferred from effect, irrelevant to practical life. Indeed, mention of eyes provoked gentle puzzlement. One twilight, seated by the communal hearth where maize beer fermented in vast gourds, Núñez attempted explanation. He drew in dusther a tree, there a goat while describing color. Pedro traced the shapes with fingertips, nodded politely, yet his brow knitted when Núñez spoke of blue sky. Sky has no roof, Núñez said, so we see endless distance color like cool water. Pedro touched his own eyelids. We hear distance echo. Small, echo big, he replied. Color, perhaps, is noise your eyes make? The hypothesis startled Núñez. Color as ocular tinnitus. How easily sighted folk assumed their perceptions universal. He countered by describing stars, pinpricks in the vault, each a sun like theirs but unimaginably far, some maybe with worlds. Pedro listened rapt, his face catching flame. Glow, worlds without walls, he murmured, awe shading his tone. Yet nothing keeps wind from blowing them away. Gravity, Núñez answered, then sighed at the futility of explaining Newtonian mechanics, sans chalkboard. Instead he invoked metaphor. Each world is slung by invisible ropes to the great center of its sky. Pedro smiled. Invisible ropes like dreams that hold us while we sleep. So philosophy blossomed amid steaming gourds. Not all, however, greeted Núñez with pastoral curiosity. A factionsmall yet influential regarded him with unease. Their patriarch, Sorolla the Elder, possessed a grave mien and a voice as measured as a metronome. He questioned Jacob. How had this outsider breached the encircling cliffs? Why did he speak of light as though it could wound? Could his presence bring sickness or worse, lure the mountain demons spoken of in ancestral chant? Superstition wrestled with pragmatism. For while Núñez lacked the community's synesthetic acuity, he stumbled at first. Banging shin against low walls, she possessed knowledge. Methods for setting bone, learned in military field hospitals. Techniques to improve yield by rotating legumes. Even the principle that boiling water before midwife deliveries reduced fatal fevers. These he shared freely, partly from altruism, partly to earn standing. Jacob championed him, as did Medina Sarote, whose visits to his cot had grown, with subtlety, more personal. She laughed at his clumsy attempts to help knead maize dough her mirth, a chime that resonated in his chest long after. Yet suspicion, like fungus, thrives in dim corners. Sorolla convened council in the hall of Ecoesa, natural lava chamber, where voices multiplied across vaults. Núñez was summoned, guided to a circle of elders seated cross-legged on mats. Their blank eyes shimmered, catching the dim phosphorescence of lichen. In Intitu tongue, Sorolla enumerated grievances, strange talk of stars and color sowing confusion among youths, his wandering alone near fumaroles where sacred slugs bred, his refusal to abandon pickaxe and knife. They were tools, yes, but also weapons. Núñez, mindful of Aristotle's precept that persuasion must mingle ethos, pathos, logos, stood tall and addressed them. He spoke first in their idiom, then repeated in Spanish for his own clarity. He professed gratitude, recounted survival of his fall, and offered loyalty. He proposed trading knowledge. He would teach them to harness geothermal heat for drying fruit and firing pottery. In exchange, they would instruct him in their arts of echolocation and night navigation. A murmur rippled some, intrigued, others wary. Sorolla's voice cut through. Knowledge is never free. Outsider. It always changes the one who receives, and more dangerously the one who gives. To this, Núñez replied with the only currency philosophers universally respect: humility. "Then let us change together," he said. "All life is change. We can steer the current or drown in it." The words hung, like motes in sunbeams invisible to his hosts. After deliberation, council decreed a trial period. Núñez would abide valley laws and contribute labor. Should he disrupt harmony, he would be escorted to the outer cliffs and left to destiny. Thus commenced his apprenticeship to the blind. Weeks matured into months, wounds knit, muscles reacquired, vigor tempered by altitude. Núñez learned to plow terraces behind sure-footed llamas bred without spook. He learned songs whose rhythm corresponded precisely to irrigation intervals. He learned to dance at harvest, his feet guided by Medina Sarate's gentle taps. In return, he demonstrated sundry innovations: a double-lever water wheel for lifting canal water, a simple lensless solar kiln that harnessed reflected heat via mica mirrors scavenged from nearby seams, and most miraculous to villagers, a tincture of quinine from cinchona bark that quelled seasonal fevers. Yet his greatest challenge was not technological but romantic, for he found himself enamored of Medina Saratea laughter, her resolute kindness, the delicate arch of her brow, though she never raised it to see him. He, who once fancied himself cosmopolitan, had loved before in Quito's salons, but never with such ignition of spirit. In moonless evenings they strolled by river's edge, her hand nested in the crook of his arm, conversing of intangible dreamsures, to know thunder's color, his, to share with her the glory of sunrise. Love in the valley, however, obeyed communal prerogatives. Marriage meant more than two hearts. It altered labor quotas, inheritance of terraces, the acoustical balance of certain dwellings tuned to family size. Sorolla perceived the peril. Núñez, with his alien ways, might father children half-sighted, thereby fracturing the valley's adaptive equilibrium. He lobbied the council to forbid union. Jacob, ever ally to progress, argued love must flower where it may, so again did politics entwine with biology. On the eve before decision, Núñez sat with Medina Sarate atop a boulder warmed by subterranean vents. Mists swirled around their ankles, luminescent with ghost fungus. He confessed fear: "If they deny us, I may be exiled beyond the walls. Will you follow?" She laid fingers on his eyelids, tracing lashes. "These," she whispered, "are not wings to carry me from home, but my heart might travel farther than my feet. A riddle, tender yet unyielding." Days later, judgment fell like Andean hail. Council decreed that Núñez might remain provisionally, but must relinquish claims of sight, cease proselytizing color, and, most grievous, undergo an operation proposed by the valley's healer, VCO philosophers. Removal of his distempered globes, said to throb with feverish light, thus bringing him peace and equilibrium among the in-situ. The pronouncement stunned him. Medina Sarate's face, usually serenity carved in mahogany, contorted in silent cry. Jacob shook his head, a gesture none present could see but all could sense in his exhaled anguish. Sorolla concluded, "We offer you place among us, stranger, equal in darkness, equal in contentment. Choose." Núñez staggered into night. Above, the encircling ramparts cut the stars like black knives, yet a sliver gap allowed one planet Venus, perhaps to glitter defiantly, a solitary jewel in velvet. He contemplated Milton's line, "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven," and found no comfort. For which realm was which? Torn between love and identity, Núñez wrestled with his own proverb. In the country of the blind the one-eyed man is king. Yet here the throne required abdication of that very eye. Could sovereignty worth possessing ever demand self-mutilation? Or was his sight an illusion of sovereignty, a gilded chain binding him to arrogance? He resolved upon escape. The next morning, under pretense of surveying canals, he ascended terraces toward the northern wall where fumaroles thinned snow. He carried dried maize cakes, a goatskin of water, and his ice axe. No guide accompanied him, He had mapped the route in head and heart. Yet at the third switchback he heard soft footsteps behind. Medina, Sarate stood, breath labored. Coward, she said not in contempt but grief. To leave without farewell. He faltered. She placed a bundle in his hand, whey bread, coca leaves, a coil of llama, wool rope. Then she lifted herself on tiptoe, pressed lips to his. It was a kiss of lavender and sorrow, as though she might taste sunrise through him. Find what you seek, she whispered. But remember, even stone walls echo names. She turned and vanished among maize stalks, her form absorbed by mist, leaving Núñez with pounding heart. Guilt knotted his throat. Yet he climbed. Near summit, night reclaimed the peaks. Temperature plunging. He bivouacked in a crevice, huddled under poncho. Dreams tormented him, valleys of storm, tossed light, Medina, Saroti blindfolded amidst a carnival of mirrors, Soroya's voice chanting Philippics against the tyranny of eyes. Dawn's pale grey found him shivering but undeterred. He reached the final cliff buttress of volcanic glass 18 spans high. Steam hissed from fissures, warping air. Here, he judged, a ledge might allow purchase to circumvent the overhang. He drove axe, hammered pitons scavenged from earlier climbs, and lunged upward. Frost broke beneath left boot. He dangled, right arm screaming under weight. Slowly he regained foothold, heart pounding like Quetzal wings. Further along, a fumarole vent belched sulphurous vapor, its warmth kept rock ice. Free. There he paused, breathing stench reminiscent of alchemist's lab, and glimpsed beyond ridge the world of sighted menglacial slopes, azure heavens, distant smoking cone of Tungurahua, freedom, shimmering. A pebble clattered behind. He wheeled, saw nothing, only swirling mist. Then from fog emerged Pedro, staff tapping rock. He called Núñez's name, voice trembling. Come back, he pleaded. They will reconsider. The old fear will pass. Núñez shook head, though Pedro could not see. I cannot, they would cut away my very self. Pedro inhaled, as though scenting argument on cold air. And if your self blinds you to greater peace, what then? Is sight alone worth exile? He stepped nearer. Cracking rock betrayed incipient slide. Núñez extended arm, but Pedro halted at cliff's edge, hands outspread like supplicant. A rumble echoed deep within mountain's gut. Fumarole pressure surged. The vent beside Núñez roared, ejecting scalding vapor. He recoiled. The rock shelf buckled. Pedro, without sight, sensed shifting sound too late. The crust beneath him crumbled. Núñez lunged, fingers brushing Pedro's sleeve mist. The youth plunged into swirling steam, his cry swallowed by chasm before Núñez could anchor rope. Silence followed grotesque, absolute broken only by Núñez's own sobbing breath. He called Pedro's name repeatedly, voice ricocheting. No answer. Terror of a new stripe gripped him. Not fear of death, but fear of moral fault. Had his rebellion doomed an innocent? He scrambled downward along treacherous sill, but warmth from vent scalded his palms, forcing retreat. Rocks tumbled, hissing into unseen depths. He paced ridge, searching alternative descent. None. The mountain kept Pedro, sealing fate like an unappealable verdict. Grief metastasized into self-reproach. Each value he prized reason. Autonomy now weighed against a life snuffed in darkness. He pictured Medina Sarate, learning of Pedro's demise, her song stilled. A proverb twisted. In the country of the blind, the sighted man may not be king, he may be executioner. Yet to return would invite either punishment or coerced blindness. To proceed meant bearing guilt into barren loneliness. Between Scylla and Charybdis he stood, uncertain where conscience pointed. The sun ascended, haloing snowfields with merciless clarity. Núñez felt eyes water not from glare alone, but from soul's salt grief. High above, condors spiraled, patient as fate, Their silent witness mocked human pretensions of dominion. Núñez slumped against basalt, heart echoing hollow. He wondered whether those invisible ropes Pedro imagined might tether not worlds but men each to each by bonds intangible yet unbreakable, so that no escape absolved responsibility. The wind answered with indifference. Núñez remained on that knife edge of basalt until the lengthening sun told him half a day had vanished in his bewilderment. At last, the cold and the shrill ache in his lungs forced a decision. He left a coil of rope looped about a lava horn, a mute memorial for Pedro, and began the weary descent, mind clawing at every memory of the lad's laughter, his bright inquiries about invisible ropes and star cities. As he reached the lower terraces, the late light had turned orange, painting the maize leaves as though with liquid copper, and the valley's evening chorus flutes, pestles. Goat's soft bleats rose to greet him in stubborn innocence. At the edge of a bean field, Medina Sarate awaited, posture rigid, chin lifted toward the slope that had swallowed her kinsman. She heard his stumbling approach and read the tale in the rasp of his breath before words could profane it. Her hands found his coat, then froze. The fine tremor that passed through her body struck him harder than any blow. When at last she asked, "Where is Pedro?" Her voice emerged small, an ember beneath ashes. Núñez managed only, "The mountain took him." They came together in a fierce embrace. But sorrow does not fuse two souls. It merely lets each glimpse the other's unhealed wounds. She did not weep, that was not the in situ way, but a keening hum vibrated in her throat, the valley's ancient lament for lost children. Núñez felt it through his ribs. When they parted, she said, "You must tell the council." Word spread ahead of them, carried by subtle shifts in footfalls and whispers of tuneless pipes. By dusk, the hall of echoes brimmed with listeners. Sorolla stood in the center, staff planted like a verdict. Núñez faced him, flanked by Jacob and Medina Sarate. Torchless darkness reigned, but he sensed every gaze. In steady tones he recounted Pedro's pursuit, the sudden venting, the collapse. He admitted his plan to leave, concealed no selfish motive, and asked only that they spare Pedro's memory blame. Silence followed, dense, suffocating. Then Sorolla intoned, "Our valley once knew balance. The outsider arrived, and balance cracks." He did not raise his voice. The vaulted walls lent it terrible grandeur. Pedro is dead. The mountains rumble, and hearts wander after impossible pictures. We must choose whether this fracture widens. A low chorus of agreement answered. Yet before judgment could fall, Jacob stepped forward. "Balance is not stasis," he said. "The earth beneath us shifts, seeds sprout, children grow. Change is the river of life. Punish a man for accident if you must, but do not damn knowledge or love." Murmurs tangled, some of assent, others of disquiet. At length Sorolla announced they would observe the ancient rite of weighing. For 9 nights Núñez's fate would remain undecided. Elders would dream, consult omens, measure harvest auguries. Until then he would reside under watch and labor for the community, unarmed. Medina Sarate was ordered to keep distance, lest sentiment sway outcome. Thus began a penance of toil and self-reflection. By day, Núñez hauled irrigation stones, his shoulders blazing anew. He was denied tools he himself had fashioned. Irony gnawed him like acid. At dusk, he slept in an unused storage hut, a young sentinel seated outside, rhythmically tapping stones to signal any movement. Even so, some villagers approached in secret curiosity and gratitude outweighing fear. Mothers whispered, "Thanks for the quinine-saving infants." A youth begged more tales of star ropes. Núñez obliged in hushed voice, guilty and proud in equal measure. On the 5th night, a tremor shook the valley minor, yet utensils rattled and water sloshed from jars. Elders took it as portent. The mountains, offended by disharmony, stirred in warning. Sorolla's faction grew bolder. Talk of the eye, surgery returned, framed now as cosmic appeasement. Núñez's stomach iced at the prospect, yet an unexpected ally emerged, the healer, Ichu Mama, matriarch of valley medicine. whose own granddaughter had survived a lung fever only through Núñez's boiled water precept. She argued that the outsider's gifts were mountain-sent, not mountain-cursed. Her gravelly voice carried weight even Soroya dared not flout. Meanwhile, Medina Sarate defied instructions. Under cloak of goatskin night, she stole to his hut. They spoke little, but the press of their foreheads said what language could not. She brought him dried ochre and a tiny reed flute. "Play when fear tightens," she murmured. "The notes will find me." She left before the sentinel, whose ears, drowsed with boredom, registered any sound. On the 8th day, the valley awoke to a sickly smell drifting from upper terraces. Goats lay listless. One kid bled at the nostrils. By noon, the cause was plain. A bacterial rot in irrigation channels, perhaps disturbed by the quake. It threatened to poison fields, livestock, even drinking springs. Panic-rippled blind folk sensed contamination by scent and texture, but remedies were slow. Núñez petitioned counsel. He had once aided army engineers in Quito during a cholera scare. Lime and controlled closures could halt spread. Soroya hesitated, accepting his counsel now would undercut the judgment pending, but Ichu Mama championed rapid action. She thrust a lime-laden basket into Núñez's arms and sent children beating drums to warn households. For 48 sleepless hours, Núñez labored, sloshing knee-deep through canals, dumping lime, diverting flow. Jacob rallied volunteers. Medina, Sarate, coordinated water collection at uncontaminated vents. Even skeptics joined. Catastrophe makes hierarchies absurd. When at last the odor lessened and goats stirred to nibble grass, exhaustion struck, dropping Núñez beside a sluice where dawn-painted sky in rose he alone could see. His eyelids drifted shut, hearing only the hush of saved crops. He awoke in the Hall of Echoes, propped against a cushion. Elders encircled him. Soroya's tone was softer, though not warm. "The weighing is complete. The mountain shook, disease tested us, and the outsider stood fast." A pause emphasized gravity. "You may stay, retaining your peculiar organs. But know this, any further disharmony tied to your visions, and the valley will choose darker means." Relief flooded Núñez like thaw water, yet it carried debris of grief, guilt, and doubt. Medina. Sarate clasped his hand before all. From somewhere above, a single drip from stalactite landed on Stone Ping Solemn as a gavel. Seasons pivoted, maize ripened, was harvested, quinoa fields reddened like rust beneath mellow suns. Núñez settled into a delicate equilibrium of usefulness and restraint. With Jacob, he built a small observatory of mirrors and mica plates on a ridge ostensibly, a weather station to predict frost for farmers, but also a perch where he might stargaze. Each clear night he recorded positions, a habit of his surveying days, though he possessed neither chronometer nor sextant, relying instead on improvised angle sticks and shadow lengths. The Intitu children visited, eager to feel the wooden models he carved of Saturn's rings and cometary tails. Their fingertips traced orbits, the way sighted children follow illustrations. In trade, they taught him echolalia songs-click patterns that mapped tree linesand, how to smell when rain prowled the eastern peaks hours before it fell. Jacob, tasting the benefits of cross-pollinated knowledge, proposed a council school where old and new wisdom might mingle. Soroya resisted the village structure, already included apprenticeship halls but, begrudgingly permitted an experimental circle, held monthly at the communal hearth. In that circle, Núñez explained germ theory with kernels of maize dipped alternately in clean and foul water. Ichu, Mama demonstrated her catalogue of medicinal lichens. Medina Sarate spoke about emotional resonance and how sound altered heart pulse, reciting lullabies to prove it. The blind children sat spellbound. A quiet revolution crept under the valley's doorsill. Not all tremors were literal. Deep within the encircling ramparts, magmatic pressures shifted. Fumaroles whistled with heightened vigor. One sunset, Núñez saw a faint red glow pulsating behind Crag's hidden vent opening wider. Geological memory warned him. Lava might yet breach. He relayed concern to Jacob, who carried it to elders. Soroya dismissed such predictions. The mountains have cradled us for centuries. But Núñez insisted. He drafted an evacuation route along ledges he had since reconnoitered, marking handrails of rope and chipping echo stones every 20 strides for orientation. Preparing for disaster became his private crusade. Amid these labors, love ripened. He and Medina Sarate shared a hut near River's Bend, though ceremony remained deferred, elders still wary of progeny mixing sensoria. Nights they lay together, her head on his chest, and he described the stars' silent marches while she interpreted the river's cadence. Pebble, timbres for each tributary, trout splash for temperature. They spoke of children, would they inherit eyes that saw, or ears that dreamed in many dimensions. Medina Sarate believed the valley would one day welcome either, once fear aged into memory. Núñez, recalling Europe's eugenic debates, felt less certain. The summer solstice brought traders from distant lower valleys, rare visitors, guided along a hidden pass by shepherds. They bartered salt cakes and dyed wool for dried fruit. Núñez, eavesdropping, realized their Quechua lacked the lilt of in-situ speech. Ridge barriers had sculpted sister languages like divergent finch beaks. Among wares he spotted a battered galvanic battery, portions corroded but salvageable. His mind sparked. With copper plates and a spinning coil he could fashion a crude telegraph, perhaps communicate through the mountain to muleteers below, bridging the worlds. But would contact liberate or imperil this sanctuary? He purchased the device anyway, promising the trader a small mirror lens as payment next season. That night he confessed scheme to Medina Sarate. She listened, fingers tracing the battery's ridged casing. "Why call beyond?" she asked quietly. "Your past or your future?" "My past," he admitted, "to tell them I yet live. And my future," he touched her cheek, "I wish to shape willingly, not in hiding." She considered long. Voices from outside will carry echoes of greed, conquest, charity, misunderstanding. Are we strong enough to sift them? He could not answer. Autumn arrived with early snows crowning the ridges. One bitter dawn, Soroya summoned Núñez to the hall. A messenger from external realms, he said, had been intercepted beyond the northern Sluice, a lone climber, half frozen, clutching a crude map. The stranger babbled of a reward promised by a Quito publisher for proof of the legendary blind nation. Word of Núñez's accidental discovery, it seemed, had trickled downhill through lost notebooks and gossip. Soroya's gaze, though visionless, skewered him. Your eyes gaze outward even when shut. What else have they beckoned? The council debated whether to let the stranger in, turn him away, or some whispered silence him forever. Núñez, appalled, argued for mercy and invisibility. Blindfold the man, nurse him, then lead him out by a circuitous route under oath of secrecy. Others countered that oaths dissolve in the sunlit world. Soon soldiers and missionaries would follow. Fear fermented like spoiled chicha. While elders wrangled, Núñez slipped to the infirmary cavern. The visitor lay feverish, cheeks wind-burnt, lashes frosted. Núñez recognized him faintly, Alejandro Carvajal, a surveyor's assistant from an earlier expedition. He pressed water to cracked lips. Carvajal's eyes fluttered open. "Jorge, saints alive, we thought you bones." Núñez bade him hush, explaining precarious circumstance. Carvajal's gaze roamed the windowless vault. "So it's true, the hidden valley. We'll be rich in lecture fees." Voices approached. Núñez concealed Carvajal under llama pelts. Soroya and 2 guards entered, staffs sweeping floor. The healer reported vital signs. Soroya listened, then ordered strict isolation until verdict. As they withdrew, his staff brushed fabric, pausing, sensing second heartbeat. Núñez's pulse hammered, but Soroya moved on. That night, Medina Sarate found Núñez staring at mica mirrors in weather station, moonlight slivering across his face. "You wrestle storms behind your eyes," she said. He told her of Carvajal and the council's dread. She answered not with comfort, but steel. If taking your eyes could halt avalanche, would you yield them? He recoiled. My sight is my witness, my conscience. Then what is mine? She challenged. I witness, through sound, scent, pressure, conscience grows anyway. Sensory organs are tools, not thrones. Your kingdom of vision is smaller than love. Words struck like hammer on bell. He realized his private ranking of sensesite atop was vanity as old as Homeric myths. Equality of perception, not uniformity, must guide them. Dawn brought crisis. Elders resolved to expel Carvajal at dusk. Blindfolded, escorted halfway to the outer world. But Carvajal, hearing snatches through infirmary walls, panicked. While guard dozed, he slipped free, stumbling into Maze Rose. A shepherd boy, startled by crashing stalks, raised alarm. In moments, villagers surrounded the intruder, staffs leveled. Carvajal, hysterical, brandished a revolver, a useless antique for scaring jaguars flashed white in sun. A misfire cracked, bullet gouging earth inches from a child's toes. Chaos erupted. Goats bleated. Adults shouted sonar clicks. Someone hurled a digging stone which struck Carvajal's temple. He collapsed. Núñez arrived as Sorolla lifted the revolver, fingers exploring its lethal geometry. The elder's expression, sightless yet formidable, seemed to weigh millennia of isolation against this hot shard of foreign power. This, he pronounced, is why walls must stand. Carvajal lived but teetered on skull fracture's edge. Ichu Mama prepared poultices. Núñez aided. Outside, council convened emergency conclave. Rumor hissed that they planned to seal the valley's upper passes with demolition. There existed ancient caches of explosive saltpeter once used for quarrying stone. Jacob argued against. Such blasts could destabilize cliffs, burying farms. Sorolla's retort echoed. Better a grave than invasion. Núñez, wiping blood from his hands, realized events hurtled toward irreconcilable fracture. Blowing the pass would doom not only intruders but the in-situ themselves, long-term. Geothermal vents might clog. Watercourses shift. He recalled Pedro's invisible ropes and saw now a rope of responsibility tethering him again. He must prevent cataclysm. That night he climbed to the explosive store and alcove beneath the western rim, where saltpeter and charcoal bricks dried for ceremonial quarrying. 2 sentries dozed within. Núñez knew their patrol rhythm from months' mapping. He eased past, heart hammering, and removed fuses, scattering them down a ravine where waterfall roar would mask the splash. Without fuses, the crude bombs were inert. He replaced tarps, obliterated footprints. But Sorolla's instincts, sharpened by years ruling through sound, sensed tampering at dawn inspection. Missing fuses announced sabotage. He summoned Núñez, accusation precise as a surgeon's scalpel. Núñez did not deny. He pleaded, "You would murder your own fields. Calamity is no cure." Sorolla's calm cracked. He decreed Núñez to stand trial at sundown, penalty to match outrage. Medina Sarate visited him in makeshift cellar goat pen, smelling of hay and panic. Through slats she spoke, "All rivers converge. This night choose ours together." He realized her plan. Help Carvajal recover enough for quiet exodus. Lead both the outsider and Medina, Sarate beyond cliffs before council could decide harsher fate. She had prepared food bundles, concealed by river reeds. Sundown bled crimson and omen Núñez alone could witness. Guards escorted him to the hall. Attendants overflowed. Tension crackled like static. Sorolla pronounced charges of treachery, endangering valley integrity. Punishment proposed. Immediate blinding scooping orbs with obsidian spoon, a procedure preserved from ancestral myth but rarely enacted. Gasps rippled even among loyalists. Sorolla raised staff for vote. In that heartbeat the earth convulsed, no mere tremor, but a convulsion that flung listeners against basalt walls. The hall's ceiling groaned. Pebbles rained. Beyond, a volcanic roar deeper than thunder rolled through ground. Núñez felt heat brush his cheeks. The mountain had chosen its hour. Panic drowned ceremony. Elders shouted evacuation chants. Drums signaled alarm sequences not heard in generations. Blinded by dust and terror, villagers clustered. Núñez, unshackled by toppled guard, sprang toward exit, locating Medina Sarate's voice rallying children. Together they herded families onto the contingency route he had mapped, hand rail ropes, echo stones glinting where his mica flakes caught firelight. Lava glow painted the sky hellish orange, even the blind sensed as radiant heat. Steam clouds roared as snowfields melted. Through suffocating ash they guided hundreds up switchbacks. Goat herds trailed bleating, smelling brimstone. At the crest a last ridge remained, but a fissure had cleaved trail. Núñez tied ropes, forming a human chain. One by one villagers crossed, feeling for footholds while rocks splintered below. Soroya himself arrived, staff gone, guided by Jacob. When he reached Núñez, their hands metone scarred by ice axe, the other leathery with age. Without words, Soroya stepped across. Behind came Ichu Mamar, shepherding Carvajal, still dazed but conscious. Núñez slung the man's arm over shoulder. Medina Sarate collected infants bundled in shawls. Far off, a crimson fountain erupted, silhouetting polylepis trees before vapor engulfed them. Hours of harrowing descent delivered the refugees to a plateau beyond the outer Walla place Núñez had scouted as safe camp. Dawn unveiled devastation, their beloved valley now a cauldron of steam and black rock, houses swallowed, terraces hissing under lava crust. The sight awful and sublime reduced Núñez to tears. The in-situ sensed ruin through collapsing echoes and absence of familiar bird calls. Wails rose, ululations that shook heaven. Yet amid ruin, life persisted. Springs still gurgled on plateau, and farther downslope lay forests teeming with fruit. Núñez addressed survivor speaking Intitu tongue, Spanish cadence subdued. The mountain closed one door, we will carve another. Soroya, eyes hollow yet steady, placed tremulous hand on Núñez's shoulder. Guide us, he whispered. In that moment the proverb transmuted. In the country of the blind, the one-eyed man is not king, he is compass. Carvajal, seated nearby, gazed open-mouthed at the tall blind elder deferring to sighted guide. Histories, Núñez knew, would soon collide. But first, shelters must rise, wounds be tended, seeds replanted. The sun climbed, illuminating both horror and possibility. Medina Sarate stood beside Núñez, her hand seeking his. Fingers interlaced, they faced a world without Wall-Seach harboring visions. The other could not experience, yet both could honor. That afternoon, Núñez retrieved from his pack the reed flute she had gifted. He played halting at first, then Shuret's plaintive notes drifting over ash-dusted slopes. The blind survivors turned faces toward music, drawing comfort like warmth. In their mingled silence and song, the Andean wind carried away the last certainty that any single sense could possess dominion over truth. Ambiguity, like the widening sky, became their new homeland. And somewhere within Núñez's breast, alongside grief for Pedro and dread of onrushing change, flickered a fragile hope. That humanity, in all its variant perceptions, might yet knit a tapestry broad enough to cloak both the seen and the unseen, leaving no soul wholly exiled in darkness, nor blinded by light alone. The days that followed were a labor of equal parts, heartbreak and ingenuity. In the thin bronze light that lingers above the central Andes each afternoon, Núñez and Jacob led search parties back to what had once been the valley rim. They could not enter the new lava crust steamed like a kiln floor, but they salvaged what the eruption had tossed outward: bundles of reed mats, gourds of still potable chicha, a few bronze hose flung clear when the domed storehouse exploded. Each item was carried with the grave tenderness, one accord's relics of the dead, for every tool, every bit of woven cloth, recalled a house now entombed beneath obsidian. Nights were colder on the plateau than they had ever been in the sheltered valley, and the blind survivors, accustomed to an even geothermal warmth, shivered beneath unfamiliar stars. Núñez organized windbreaks of cut shrub and taught the people of the plateau a sighted trick, facing the northeast side of each temporary hut toward the prevailing wind to keep smoke from choking sleepers. Medina Sarote, whose hearing was finer than any, listened to the new air currents and refined the angles, her small corrections saving many from frostbitten cheeks. Carvajal recovered slowly, skull bandaged by Ichumama with ragwort poultice and strips of soft vicuña fleece. He watched, half-dazed, as the Intitu worked by calculated sound-tapping rocks, humming distances, passing firebrands hand to hand without once colliding. More than once he muttered to Núñez, "The journals will scarcely be believed." Núñez would nod, but his focus lay with the here and now, carving bowls from alder trunks so the children might drink broth without burning their fingers, mixing lime and ash to create a sanitizer for latrines, and scouting for a cave that could serve as grain cache once new harvests arrived. On the 8th morning after the cataclysm, the weather station mirrors, miraculously unbroken, reflected a sky the color of tarnished nickel. Smoke from the collapsed vent had risen high enough to redden dawns and dull noons. Núñez worried that ashfall might stunt crops down in the inhabited Thurng Valley miles below. Carvajal shared the concern. Villages like Cajabamba and Pungala could face famine if too much grit settled on their bean terraces. Their duty, therefore, extended beyond the blind survivors. "Send me," Carvajal begged as soon as he could stand unaided. "Let me take word to the coastal authorities. They can send mules with maize, maybe doctors. You guide me to the first pass after that I know the descent." Núñez hesitated. A single messenger could vanish without trace. Yet delaying might doom two peoples at once. The council, now 7 elders, Soroya presiding but visibly bowed by, grief listened to the proposal at dawn council. Soroya's voice was husky, less certain than before. "We have seen what stubbornness brings," he said, acknowledging his own error without bald confession. "Let news travel. If the world comes with claws, we shall still meet it with open hands first." So they prepared Carvajal's departure. Núñez and Medina Sarote outfitted him with 2 woolen ponchosón dyed in Intitu patterns like undulating sound waves, the other plain for blending among highland peasants, plus a pouch of parched barley, a twist of coca leaves, and the weather-scarred revolver, cleaned and loaded. They gave him, too, a small obsidian pendant etched with the valley's spiraling echo glyph. "Token of truth," Medina Sarote explained. "Show listeners that what you say came from the dark of hidden hearts." At the dawn of departure, a curious scene unfolded. Soroya placed both hands on Carvajal's shoulders and spoke a blessing in the musical tongue. Carvajal, understanding not a word, answered in breathless Spanish, "I will return with aid, by the faith, by my mother's memory." He turned to Núñez. "You should come, Jorge. You belong with the sighted." But Núñez glanced at Medina, Sarote, at Jacob and Ichu, Mama, and shook his head. "My place, for now, is where sight and sound are both needed." They embraced like brothers parted at a harbor. Núñez escorted him across 2 ridges, pointed out a cairn that marked the surest descent, and watched until Carvajal, limping but resolute, dwindled into a grey mote amid the snow-dusted scrub. Then he returned, heart pulled taut as violin wire between the plateau and the world below. By mid-season, the survivors had shaped something resembling a village. Half-dug-out homes roofed with lashings of grass, water led by bamboo channels from a melt-fed stream, terraces scratched from slope where soil and ash mingled fertile. They planted mashua and quinoa, quick crops that might yield before first heavy snows. Núñez introduced a trick he recalled from an agronomist in Riobamba, mixing charred brush into the furrows to lock nutrients. The blind farmers felt the consistency change beneath their hoes and adopted the practice wordlessly. Soroya, for all his earlier severity, turned shepherd of morale. He visited each hut nightly, reciting long narrative poems of valley history, mapping with language a homeland that now existed only in memorial sound. Children pressed close as the elders' cadence painted the lost domes, the fragrant bean fields, the hall of echoes where nothing ever disappeared. Núñez often listened from shadow, humbled by how story could restore what lava had taken. Yet new tensions brewed. Without the natural walls, the blind of the plateau met wind, predators, and the sprawling emptiness that eyes alone tame quickly. Some mostly younger, adults thrilled at the openness. Others flinched at every distant crack. Medina Sarate guided weaving circles, where they wove not mats but sonic maps, cords knotted with beads of clay and seed that, when shaken, produced a signature rustle for each direction. Hung from poles, they functioned as auditory signposts, clattering differently under varying winds so travelers could orient. Núñez compared them to the compass rose. Medina, Sarate, smiling, dubbed them Rosarios de Rumor, rosaries of rumor. Whenever debate about settling permanently on the plateau grew acrid, Núñez found himself mediator. In a decade, he proposed one evening, tracing shapes in dirt for those who could not see. You might have two homes, a new cultivated basin here, and trading ties with the valleys below. He spoke of llamas carrying wool, of salt flows replaced by knowledge flows. A few nodded, others feared dependence. The conversation always ended unfinished, like a melody truncated on the dominant chord. 3 lunar cycles after Carvajal's departure, a faint drumbeat echoed from the western pass. Lookout sighted Núñez, and 3 sharp-eared youths scrambled to the ridge. A column approached, 20-odd mules led by mestizo arrieros, a Franciscan friar atop a white mule, and, to Núñez's shock, 2 uniformed soldados of the Republican Guard. Carvajal rode near the front, bandage gone, face sunbitten but broad with relief. He waved a white cloth whenever switchbacks allowed. The Institute gathered at camp margin, uncertain whether to greet or hide. Núñez advanced alone, staff raised. Carvajal dismounted and embraced him fiercely. I kept my vow, amigo. Food, medicine, tents, and, he lowered voice, an inspector from Quito's Ministry of Development. They smell opportunity in the hot springs you described. Opportunity. The word fell heavy as an ingot. Núñez turned to the waiting caravan, saw the friar gazing about in wonder, the soldiers fingering rifles clipped to saddles, the inspector a bespectacled man with surveying tools already studying the terrain. He felt the invisible ropes tighten. Hours later, under a hastily erected sunshade, council and visitors met. Carvajal translated. The friar, Father Dominguez, spoke first. Mission of charity, food, sacramental comfort, good news of Christ. The inspector, Senor Ramos, produced maps and spoke of geothermal baths that could draw health tourists. Rail spur one day. Modest taxes for the local inhabitants, naturally. Compulsory education, under national standards. Sorolla listened in granite silencer, so it seemed until Núñez noticed the elder's fingers restlessly sketching patterns on the mat, syllables of the echoglyph for peril. Negotiations dragged days. Supplies were distributed: flour, salt, quinine-earning friar goodwill. The soldiers erected a canvas barrack on plateau edge. For the security of all, Ramos hired a few able-bodied Institute to clear a mule track. Pay was good bright new Sucre coins, but Núñez saw suspicion glimmer behind blind faces. Money is a concept easier felt than understood. Where would they spend it? Carvajal sensed the rift widening. In private, he urged Núñez, help broker a fair accord. These people need roads and doctors, not a monastery and a casino. Núñez suggested gradual contact, periodic trade fairs, no permanent guard post, strictly limited mining. Ramos scoffed. Your valley's worth 10 chimborazos in medicinal tourism alone. The nation cannot ignore such asset. Medina, Sarate, present, asked Carvajal to describe Ramos's expression. When she heard the edge of avarice, she frowned like someone tasting unripe fruit. On the 5th dawn, the earthquake's afterpain returned. a rumble deep beneath camp. Sentries shouted, tents swayed. This tremor was mild, but Núñez saw terror blaze anew among the Intitu. Father Dominguez claimed it a reminder of divine caprice, advisable to build a chapel. To the inspector, it was a geological hint of continuing heat excellent for spa investors. To Núñez and Medina Sarote, it was a warning that the ground was still unsettled, physically, culturally, morally. That evening, Sorolla asked Núñez to walk. They climbed to a spur where one could hear the plateau's bustle, yet feel alone. The elder leaned on his staff, face turned toward false horizon. "I was wrong, Jorge, to think stillness safe." His voice was weary. "But neither is rushing water always pure. I am old, cannot ford this new river. You must stand midstream." The task he bequeathed was monumental. Craft a pact with the outside world that preserved Intitu autonomy while granting exchange. He spoke of a council to include sighted and blind, valley and republic, with rotating seats. Núñez felt weight settle on his shoulders, but accepted. 2 weeks of careful talk followed. Núñez, Carvajal, and Father Dominguez drafted articles. The plateau and its people recognized as a semi-autonomous commune under Ecuadorian sovereignty. No land sale without communal consent. Geothermal project to employ Intitu at protected wages. Profits tithed for a bilingual school, where both Braille, like not records and Spanish primers would be taught. No firearms allowed in settlement. The inspector balked, but a telegram from Quito, perhaps prompted by Carvajal's press contact, surged flexibility, envisioning headlines of enlightened policy. At a dusk assembly where stars pricked the ash-thinned veil, Sorolla laid his hands on the parchment and spoke into hush. "May these marks, though unseen by us, bear the sound of our beating hearts." Ramos signed. Father Dominguez blessed. Carvajal flourished his signature, with a grin toward Medina Sarote. Lastly, Núñez wrote his name, remembering the proverb anew. In the country of the blind, the one-eyed man becomes bridge. The first real snow of winter arrived the next morning, a benign blizzard that turned canvas roofs into puffed domes and muffled every step. Children scampered, tasting flakes that hissed on warm tongues. The inspector and soldiers, chattering teeth betraying coastal upbringings, withdrew into their stove-heated barrack. The Intitu moved by merged sense sheet of breath, shock of cold drafts resuming routine almost unchanged. Núñez and Medina Sarote stood at camp edge, watching flakes swirl like so many silent questions. He described how each hexagonal crystal differed, a chaos of geometry she could only imagine. She reached to touch a drift cresting on his sleeve, pressed the melting water to her lips. "It sounds like soft sand when you speak of it," she said, "but it tastes like morning." They discussed future travels. Perhaps in spring they would journey with Carvajal down to Quito, present a petition for recognition of Intitu language. Medina Sarote expressed a wish to hear a library, all those papers rustling like distant rain. Núñez envisioned her at a university hall, lecturing scholars on echolalia topography. He hoped their own child, if fate allowed, would walk both those realms with ease. But hopes, like mountains, contain fissures. 4 days into snowfall, the soldiers bored and seeking diversion set targets of empty tins along the ridge and fired revolvers. The reports cracked the frozen air, cascading echoes that for the Intitu meant avalanche, attack, apocalypse. Panic roiled, goats stampeded, injuring 3 elders. Sorolla, stricken by fury and sorrow, demanded the rifles removed according to pact. Ramos apologized, citing misunderstanding, but the damage wormed deep. Núñez confronted the lieutenant. "Your weapons are tinder in a forest of fear," he said. The officer shrugged, muttering of regulations. Next dawn the rifles were gone from rack. Núñez found them buried beneath hay and mule pengarilla, planning for quick access. The bridge he had built now quivered under duplicity's load. He confided to Medina Sarote on a moonless night. They agreed. Trust must be enforced by transparency. The following council, Núñez produced the hidden arms before all, exposing breach. Ramos sputtered. Soroya demanded the soldiers leave, but escort was due to remain until spring convoy. Stalemate settled like hoarfrost. When January sun returned, Carvajal again descended valley to speed up supply chain. Father Dominguez remained, building a chapel from scree stones, playing tinny harmonium whose hymns drifted thin on crisp mornings. Children liked the rhythm, elders found it alien. The rifles, locked in Ramos's chest, stayed unused but haunting. One twilight, Núñez, atop a surveying knoll, saw smoke curling from an unexpected ravine mile north. Investigating with Jacob, he discovered oilskins, crates, and strangers 3 prospectors led by a North American named Crowell. They had bribed the muleteer guide, circumvented checkpoints, and were already sampling fumarole gas for borax and lithium. Crowell welcomed Núñez with a too-firm handshake, praising the bright future of these primitive thermal fields. He offered a partnership stake. Núñez's face hardened. The pact with Quito forbade outside claims without council sanction. Crowell shrugged. Paper in Quito's archives ain't gold in Yankee pockets. That night, Núñez reported intrusion. Ramos demurred easier to integrate investors than to expel. Soroya spat the word colonist like ash. Medina Sarate listened to the argument escalate, then suggested, let the new school barely framed serve as meeting hall tomorrow, where prospectors must plead case before entire community. The confrontation roiled like summer thunder. Crowell extolled profit and progress, sprinkling Spanish phrases and Bible references. He offered coin, medical supplies, whiskey. The Institute voiced questions through Núñez. Would drilling quiet the springs on which they relied? Would strangers obey echo, path lines? Crowell's answers fumbled. In the tense hush that followed, a child named Lama Fawn stepped forward. She had been among those trampled during rifle panic. A bandage wrapped her ankle. She asked in clear Institute song why Crowell's machines sounded louder than goats and whether they would scare away the mountain's breathing, her word for the fog that carried water droplets to their moss traps. Translation left the crowd murmuring. Crowell scoffed, called her little señorita, patted her head. That single condescension decided matters. The council voted unanimous rejection. Crowell stormed out, vowing he would return with government writ. Ramos paled. The friar prayed. Núñez watched winter clouds pile over ridges, thinking how ambition, like lava, always seeks a fissure. Spring thaw brought the first harvest from plateau, terraces meager but celebratory. Elder women ground mashua into cakes sweet enough to coax smiles. During the feast, Soroya addressed the people, his voice finally regaining some of the steel lost in catastrophe. We have eaten what our hands planted, he said. Now we must plant minds too. The school opened next day. Núñez teaching numbers and star stories in the morning. Medina, Sarate instructing tongue, click navigation in afternoon. Father Dominguez offering literacy of Roman letters to any who wished. Núñez found joy watching a boy trace a capital A after following bead maps for years, and later that same afternoon lead Núñez blindfolded through a maze by echo alone. Mutual tutelage flowered. The proverb, once haughty, dissolved into reciprocity. Some evenings, Núñez stood outside the still roofless chapel with Ramos, discussing geology while the inspector chain-smoked. Ramos confessed he had a daughter losing her sight to inherited glaucoma. The thought that a sightless society could thrive both frightened and fascinated him. Núñez suggested he learn the Intitu chord score for wind direction. Ramos laughed, then accepted the offer, awkwardly finger-plucking the beads. Yet forces beyond individuals advanced. Crowell returned, escorted by 2 more soldiers and bearing a decree from provincial governor approving exploratory drilling in service of national interest. The communal pact, unsigned by the governor, ranked second to executive fiat. Outrage erupted. The Institute prepared petitions, but Crowell's men unloaded steel pipes within earshot of communal ovens. Tension thickened to a suffocating pace. Núñez proposed non-violent obstruction. occupy the drill site day and night, singing work songs whose volume would make machinery operation impossible. Medina, Sarate organized singers. For 3 days they ringed the clearing, their polyphonic drones reverberating off basalt, confusing the prospector's sense of distance and driving mules skittish. No drill turned. Crowell retaliated on dawn of 4th day, sending guards to disperse the gathering. A scuffle ensued. A butt. Stroke felled Jacob, blood spraying against quartz. Núñez stepped between rifle and crowd. He spoke to Crowell of treaties, of the valley's right to self-determination. Crowell sneered, called him traitor to his own eyes. At that instant, Soroya, leaning on staff, began to sing the valley's oldest war chant, a deep ululation that merged lament and warning. Others joined. The sound grew overwhelming, a wall of vibration striking chest and skull alike. The soldiers backed away, faces blanching. Ramos, caught between directives and conscience, signaled ceasefire. He invoked a clause in the decree, allowing temporary halt if public safety at risk. Crowell cursed, but for a day drilling paused. That night, Núñez found himself staring into campfire, pondering whether progress ever learned from the myths it crushed. Medina Sarate knelt beside him. "If sighted power returns with more guns?" she asked. Núñez admitted uncertainty. Flight, again, remained option yet. Fleeing forever was surrender. Medina Sarate answered, in tone calm as glacier, "Then we will teach them until they listen or lose their hearing." The strategy of sound not violence would be their shield. In midsummer, Carvajal arrived at head of a caravan, not of soldiers but journalist and American correspondent from Harper's, an Argentine naturalist, 2 Quito editors. They had come to witness the Republic's extraordinary experiment in sensorial democracy, as Carvajal headlined. Cameras clicked. Sketches were made of bead maps, of blind children teaching sighted visitors the subtle grammar of foot, fall echoes. Crowell's bristling machines suddenly looked brutish in print's contrast. Public opinion shifted. The governor, fearing scandal, rescinded drilling license. Crowell departed, bitterness in every clank of mule chain. Ramos, relieved, requested reassignment to coastal customs. Before leaving, he attended the school's first recital, clapping shyly as children recited both Spanish alphabet and Intitu warble script. Father Dominguez, having grown fond of not rosary hymns, remained voluntarily, building a bell whose tone matched the valley's lost waterfall. When rung at dawn, it sent tremors of memory through every soul, uniting past and present in a single sustained note. By the next harvest, the plateau's hamlet boasted adobe houses with real windows, though many remained shuttered alongside echo rosarios strung like wind chimes. Llamas bore wool to market towns. In return came coffee beans and phonograph records. One record, sent by a New York benefactor, contained Debussy's La Mer. Medina Sarate listened, tears on cheeks, claiming she could taste moonlight in the chords. The school flourished. A printing press, modified with raised ink rollers, produced bilingual readers. Núñez watched a 7-year-old boy run fingers over his own name embossed on title page. The child whispered the letters aloud, and a thrill like electricity shot through the room. Yet even in these triumphs, Núñez felt a tug of melancholy and undercurrent that progress, while gentler this time, still eroded something fragile. Tourists would come. Novelty seekers would demand performances of the blind guides. Could culture survive commodification? During solitary hikes to still smouldering craters, he pondered Wells's old paradoxes: empire and empathy, science and hubris. One twilight, he and Medina Sarate stood on the ridge where first they spoke of sunrise. The sky flared peach and lavender above a sea of cloud filling the old valley's scar. Núñez described hues, then remembering humility asked her to describe what she heard. She closed eyes, habit, not necessity, and said, "I hear ash cooling tiny cracks as it turns to memory. I hear goats learning a new path on the far slope." their bells now echoing twice instead of once because of a new rock face. And I hear your heart pace, slower than last year at peace, perhaps. Her words gentled him. He realized kingship of vision had long left him. What remained was companionship of sensoria. They would shape a civilization where color and cadence danced together, neither lord nor servant. As dusk deepened, he recalled a line from Lucretius about atoms drifting in immeasurable voids, occasionally swerving, creating worlds. The eruption had been such a swerve. From its chaos, new order emerged. He squeezed Medina Sarate's hand. Below, lamp oil for now, soon perhaps electric began to gleam like scattered constellations over the plateau, guiding home those who saw, those who heard, and those still learning both. And somewhere in that mingled glow and murmur lay the living answer to the ancient proverb. Not a ruler's crown of single vision, but a woven circlet of many perceptions, flexible enough to bend yet strong enough to bind a people no longer blind, no longer merely sighted, but awake in every sense to the wonder and peril of being human beneath an infinite, indifferent sky. Late in the waning year, a delegation set out for Quito. Núñez, Medina, Sarate, Soroya's nephew Itzmenko, as spokesman for the elders, and 2 muleteers well versed in the serrated trails that coil round Antisana and Pichincha. Word of the in-situ experiment had reached the capital, amplified by newspaper sketches, and the Ministry of Civil Affairs had invited representatives of the Plateau Cooperative to address the Cortes on questions of infrastructure grants, health ordinances, and, beneath the polite phrasing, taxation. They travelled at a stately pace, descending first through polylepis ghost forests where frost-furred lichens hung like uncombed beards, then into the silver-green valleys where terrace rice rippled under cool sunlight. Medina Sarate rode side-saddle on a lead mule. The animal's bells chimed a pentatonic scale she had tuned herself, each note a progress report to the blind rider behind. At night on mossy campsites, Núñez translated the distant constellations Canopus low, Acrux tilting, while she traced with fingers the invisible paths they etched on his palm. Quito received them with the startled admiration, usually reserved for circus savants. Journalists pressed close, pushing pencils beneath Itzmenko's nose, though the young man could not see them. Society ladies begged Medina Sarate to explain how she heard colors. A medical committee coaxed her into a laboratory thick with carbolic and lamplight, where she was asked to identify embossings on silver plates by faint changes in reflected warmth. She obliged, but when applauded like a performing seal, she excused herself and did not return. The legislative session proved more decorous, but no less testing. Núñez spoke in measured Spanish of communal ownership, of bead map pedagogy, of volcanic hazards that still stalked the plateau. A few deputies nodded, others whispered about untapped borax reserves. When Medina Sarate rose a voice low, yet astonishingly, firm, the chamber grew still. "Gentlemen," she said, "you speak of mines and baths. We speak of pulse and pasture. Count profit if you must just. Count the breathing of children also." The stenographer paused, unsure how to render her cadence, but the gallery broke into murmurs of respect. After 3 days, the Cortes ratified a statute designating the plateau a protected synesthetic reserve, exempt from concession for 15 years, its people empowered to veto any industrial scheme by 2/3 vote. It was a triumph, but a conditional, temporary one that Núñez understood could erode the moment commodities rose in price elsewhere. Still, they celebrated that night in a modest fonda off Calle Garcia Moreno, sipping canelazo, while Andean guitars throbbed behind the adobe walls. Before dawn they set out homeward, packs laden with microscopes for the school, quinine ampoules, seed potatoes bred for altitude, and a single gramophone gifted by a philanthropist. Medina Sarate carried, in an inner pouch, embossed braille plates donated by clerics in the Jesuit Collegesh. Could not read them, but the raised dots intrigued her fingertips like a foreign constellation. Back on the plateau, spring breathed new life. Young quinoa shot up red, veined, and llamas birthed creche after woolly creche. Yet cloud banks to the south bore a bruised undercolor. The volcano Sangay had been coughing. Twilight after twilight, Núñez measured the sulfur in the air. His lips tasted matches. Seismographs were still scarce luxury items, so the Institute relied on goat behavior barometers. If the animals bleated at empty air, ground waves were underway. One night the goats were silent, but a different alarm arrived. Enrique Valdez, a forward-thinking ophthalmologist who had accompanied a scientific caravan, requested a private audience with Núñez and Medina Sarote. In the glow of a pine resin lamp, he revealed stereographs taken during a routine medical check. The optic pits of several Institute infants, born within the last season, showed incipient retinal tissue, rudimentary and non-functional, yet indisputable. "Something in your new environment," he murmured, "is nudging dormant genes. Given generations, sight might re-emerge." The news rippled like shockwaves. For Sorollano Fraile, his hair the color of ash, this was prophecy reversed. Blindness, once guardian of harmony, could vanish like melted wax. He summoned a council that lasted till rooster crow. Some elders feared that half-sighted children would straddle worlds, never belonging. Others saw promise. Perhaps they could monitor distant lava glows unaided, read warning smoke. Medina Sarote thought of her unborn child growing within her body. She had shared the secret with Núñez alone. Would the infant open eyes one dawn and see a mother it loved, yet could not resemble? She pressed palm to abdomen, listening for the hush of possibilities. Summer heat swelled. Tourists arrived in trickles, shepherded by cooperative guides who enforced quiet zones and forbade flash photography. The gramophone in the schoolhouse became a small miracle. Caruso's tenor spun into the rafters, and blind listeners clapped, convinced the singer was perched above like some golden-throated condor. Children traced LP grooves with nails, marveling that tiny valleys could contain thunder. Núñez used the discs to teach fractions pointing where radius met spiral, where time mapped to distance. But the outer world never sleeps. In Guayaquil, a syndicate consolidated lithium claims. Its prospectus mentioned adjacent highland tracts of demonstrated geothermal activity. Papers reached the plateau inside, burlap coffee sacks. Ramosno, a customs officer, mailed a warning note. Carvajal telegraphed, "Coming with journalists again. Hold firm." Tension thickened. Crowell returned, this time bearing notarized leases from families in a valley 2 ridges over, granting passage rights for a haul road that would skirt Institute lands by mere bowshot. He arrived at dusk, trenchcoat flapping, promising that no drill would bite Institute soil. But heavy wagons would rumble near bead map signposts, masking the delicate echoes the blind used to navigate. Council debate grew acrid. Younger Institute, eager to test sighted commerce, favored compromise. Jacob, voice hoarse, reminded them how easily promises dissolve in solvent of gold. Núñez saw his adopted people cleaving into factions, progressionists versus preservationists. In the faint orange dawns, he climbed to a spur above the old lava field where steam vents still sighed. There he recorded journal entries on onion skin paper, trying to map a route through moral fog. "Civilization," he wrote, "behaves like lava, itself nourishing once cooled, lethal while fluid." Medina Sarote's belly grew, rounding beneath alpaca wool. She walked each evening along the plateau's rim accompanied by llama fawn, now recovered and newly curious about astronomy. Núñez joined them, sketching constellations on the air. One twilight, the girl asked if the baby would be born with sun eyes. Medina Sarote paused. "Whichever senses it bears," she replied. "We will teach it to listen to the mountains and watch the wind." 2 weeks later, she went into labor swift, silent, the way alpine animals do. In a hut, scented with eucalyptus, Ichu Mama midwifed a son. At sunrise, Núñez held the tiny bundle beneath the high slanted light and gasped. The infant's lids fluttered, then opened. Not opaque ivory, but translucent hazel gazed back, pupils dilating. He saw shapes. Surely Damiette he saw. Medina Sarote, sensing the hush in the room, whispered, "Tell me." Núñez, voice trembling, described the miracle. Joy wrestled fear in every heartbeat that followed. The elders visited, laying fingertips on tiny eyelids that blinked at warmth. Some exhaled awe. Others stiffened as though fault lines cracked beneath feet. Soroya asked to hold the child. The old man's trembling hands cradled new life. Tears slipped from sightless eyes. "So the circle turns," he murmured. "May we bend with it, not break." Word traveled faster than condor flight. Within a month, scholars petitioned to study the boy. Missionaries spoke of biblical metaphors. Crowell's investors saw marketing gold. "Come, bathe where the blind regain sight." The plateau braced. In council, Núñez argued for a cordon of modest secrecy allowing selective science, but barring spectacle. Younger voices countered. Investment could build a clinic, improve diets, pave mule tracks. Medina Sarote listened, rocking her son whose eyes tracked shafts of dust-lit air. Finally she stood, spoke only 7 words. "He is not a ticket to market." The chamber fell still. Debate adjourned. The volcano spoke next. At 4 in the morning, a detonation reverberated beneath granite like a bass drum. Núñez sprang from bed, baby clutched to chest. Outside the eastern sky pulsed vermilion. Ash flakes drifted like burning snow. Eruption columns roared from a flank vent, newly opened 6 miles away safe for now, but a reminder that plateaus rest on restless bones. Lighting storms laced the plume. Thunder cracked above harvest fields and set goats bleating. As day broke, pumice dust veiled sun to an amber disk. The Intertu convened emergency crews, covering water cisterns, tethering llamas. Núñez measured ashfall, 1 centimeter in 4 hour enough to skewer young quinoa if it continued. Reporters, arriving that very afternoon, photographed the grey-veiled settlement. Crowell's men, undeterred, inspected steam vents for new borax crystals. Father Dominguez led prayers but coughed on ash, handing out wet kerchiefs. The fragile truce between worlds threatened to crumble under literal fallout. At dusk, a larger tremor split a cliff westward, sending boulders thundering into an irrigation gully. One crushed Crowell's sample crates, another flattened a tourist tent, miraculously empty. Panic flared anew. The soldiers reassigned months earlier, but recently dispatched as security-cocked rifles, though no enemy was present. Their footfalls, amplified by fear, sowed chaos among blind farmers. In the dark, a misunderstanding blossomed. A frightened youth struck a rifle with his cane, the weapon discharged skyward, and hysteria rolled like wildfire. Núñez, voice raw, shouted evacuation orders to the communal cave network he had charted seasons before. Echo rosaries rattled in coded alarms as elders guided villagers along memorized click paths. Medina Sarote, baby bound to her with a sling, led a column of women through blinding ash, her voice singing the lullaby that kept steps in unison. Down in the drifting grey, Crowell cursed lost investment, demanding soldiers escort equipment out. But the ash thickened, animals balked, even sighted men stumbled blind in particulate dusk. Núñez found Crowell groping beside a toppled mule and steered him toward shelter. "In the country of the ash," Núñez said grimly, "both of us are blind." They reached the cavern swarm, damp, lined with luminous fungi, 1,500 souls packed together, breathing shallow through cloths. Father Dominguez's bell, salvaged just before, rang slowly, its tone weaving calm. As hours crawled, tremors faded, ash drift diminished. At dawn, a scout reported the vent's fury had subsided to a dull exhale. The refuge emerged, coated head to toe in grey, like statues rising from centuries. The plateau was scarred but standing. Quinoa bowed under pumice, roofs sagged. Yet streams flowed clear, goats bleated for fodder, and the school's adobe walls endured, relief mingled with exhaustion. Núñez organized brush brooms. Children swept pathways wearing goggles fashioned from bottle glass and cloth strips. Sighted and blind worked shoulder to shoulder, indistinguishable silhouettes in the monochrome world. In the disaster's hush, a revelation dawned. Calamity, impartial, had leveled hierarchies. Investors, scholars, missionary soul had sheltered under the same breathing hill, guided by bead map keepers whose authority no rifle could counterfeit. Crowell, cheeks streaked with ash, approached Soroya and offered a contrite handshake. The elder accepted, then guided the prospector's hand to the pumice-buried sprout of a quinoa plant. "See?" he said, though Crowell could not see. "Even buried eyes can rise again." Rebuilding became Renaissance. The Protectorate statute, about to lapse, was renewed indefinitely in Quito, newspapers hailing the in situ as exemplars of sustainable convivencia. A modest geothermal bathhouse was approved, designed by in situ architects who shaped acoustics before aesthetics. Profits funded an infirmary, the region's first to combine auscultation with scent-based diagnostics. Medina Sarate's son, named Rumi Sol for Stone Sun, toddled early, his hazel gaze curious yet untroubled by bright noon. He delighted in echo games, flinging pebbles and following the bounce with both eyes and ears, inventing a hybrid sport that other children soon copied. When Núñez watched them sighted and blind together inventing new grammar of play, he felt the old proverb sigh like thawing ice, releasing its final hold. Years folded into the valley's new rhythm. Soroya passed quietly one frosted dawn, his staff bequeathed to Rumi Sol, who used it upside down as a hobby horse. Father Dominguez composed a mass, whose Kyrie blended Andean flute with rosary rattles, later performed in Cuenca to standing ovation. Carvajal wrote a book, Through Echoing Walls, that funded scholarships for Plateau youth to study medicine at the Coastal University. As for Núñez, he aged into a wiry patriarch, beard streaked silver, eyes still keen. In a leather notebook he wrote a final entry half memoir, half apology to the mountain and closed it with these words: "If fate grants a second blindness at the end of life, may it be the blindness of fulfilled humility, not of arrogance returned." One violet evening, many seasons hence, he walked with Medina Sarate to the rim overlooking their first encampment, now a bustling terrace town aglow with mica-framed lanterns. They stood silent while swifts traced calligraphy against the afterglow. Rumi Sol, taller than his father, joined them, describing the colors he saw in clouds and the changes he heard in wind tone. Both parents listened, each perceiving half, together perceiving whole. The horizon shimmered not quite dusk, not yet night an ambiguity of light that promised no conclusions. And in that suspended hour, the Andean peaks, ancient and indifferent, loomed around them, holding close a country no longer of the blind, no longer of the sighted, but of a people still discovering how to be fully, perilously alive. A decade slid by as imperceptibly as snowmelt soaking into volcanic loam, and the Plateau town official maps now labeled it Nueva, Into unfurled, terraces of progress that neither Núñez nor Medina Sarote could have sketched in their most daring dusk talks. The geothermal bathhouse, once a low steaming pool hemmed by basalt, had expanded into a graceful complex of cloistered courts and slate-tiled canals whose sluicing waters sang soft lullabies to bathers. Sighted visitors arrived by weekly auto-caravanally petrol lorries, geared for mountain talker parking well beyond the resonance perimeter, and finishing the ascent on silent funicular hauled by hemp cables. At the terminus, they disembarked into a hush that felt almost ecclesiastical. Echo, maps etched in bronze guided them, step by measured step, while valley guides now proudly bilingual offered small clay bells calibrated to each walkway so no stranger might flounder. Commerce existed, yet avarice seemed held at bay by custom. No neon, no gaudy banners, only discreet braille and print plaques. The Republic's Revenue Office sent accountants each quarter. They rode away scratching heads at ledgers, in which profits were tithed first to communal grain reserves and second to scholarship funds. leaving margins too thin to tempt nationalization. Rumi Sol, adolescent now, had become a bridge incarnate. His eyes, pale bronze, recorded all that light could paint. His ears, trained in bead, map schoolrooms, past whispers, ricocheting along colonnades. He spent mornings translating technical manuals for the in-situ machine shop lathes, driven by a Pelton wheel, harnessing waterfall energy, and afternoons, practicing a new sport of his invention, sonido ballon, a leather sphere packed with rattling maize kernels so blind and sighted teammates could track it equally. The rules were swift, darting, elegant. Travelers from Lima and La Paz soon carried the game back, boasting that imperial football felt sluggish by comparison. Núñez, hair white as pumice dust, served now as provisional prefect in office. He accepted reluctantly when the Republic insisted on a civilian liaison. His days wove between duties as negotiator, weather station keeper, and grandfather to two small girls born to Rumi Sol's older sister, Lila Chaska, one child blind, the other sighted. He marveled that the household's nightly story circle accommodated both with effortless grace-owned child tracing braille block letters, while the other followed painted lithographs, their giggles converging where words and pictures met. Yet even gentle equilibria rest on restless plates. Far overseas, a war of nations erupted, and nitrate prices soared as shells devoured South American guano supplies. Prospectors, sniffing substitute reagents, filed mineral claims up every Andean spur. One crisp September dawn, a dirigible painted in the colors of a European chemical trust drifted over Nueva Intitu, whirring like some bloated hornet. Its gondola, brass-rigged, lowered a megaphone through which an accented envoy requested permission to survey fumarole gases for industrial fixation plants. Children shrieked delight, goats bolted. The council, convened within hours, voted polite refusal. Airship crews were welcome as guests, not scavengers. The dirigible hovered 2 days, sending down gift silk candy, a wind-up phonograph that crooned Viennese waltzes then chugged away into cobalt sky. Rumi Sol, watching it diminish, felt a new ache, fascination spliced to foreboding. Weeks later, rumors came via telegraph that the trust's agents had bought rights from a cash-strapped governor in neighboring province Tungura Huarites, whose boundaries, on hasty maps, blurred ominously close to plateau aquifers. Núñez traveled to the provincial capital by narrow-gauge rail to contest. He presented topographic charts, mineralogical studies proving in-situ stewardship. The governor listened, mustache trembling, but confessed coffers were empty. Foreign francs shored up hospitals and fortifications. Patriotism sometimes requires pawning heirlooms, he sighed. Núñez returned with parchment copies of provisional deeds and a weight in his chest heavier than altitude. Back home, Medina Sarate met him beneath the wind chimes. She had aged gracefully silver woven into her braids like threads of dawn cloud, but her step retained dancer poise. He recounted the governor's words. She placed hand to his cheek. "A pawned heirloom is not yet sold," she said. "We will redeem it." Redemption meant strategy. Jacob, wizened yet still broad-shouldered, proposed buying the contested tract outright through a cooperative land trust. Carvajal wired contacts in Quito's stock exchange. Father Dominguez, now archdeacon, tapped ecclesiastical charity. Within 3 months they gathered a respectable fund, but the foreign syndicate's bid doubled theirs overnight. Prices, like lava flows, moved only downslope. That winter fireside debates grew sharper. Younger progressionists asked whether selective partnership might, after all, serve common weal, a modest ammonia plant, strictly carbon offset, revenue for expanded infirmary. Preservationists recalled Crowell's broken promises. The schism widened, not between blind and sighted, but between conceptions of future. Soroya's staff, mounted in council hall since his passing, vibrated in mountain drafts like a mute reminder that wisdom does not die, it merely waits in hollow wood. When first wild lupines pushed cobalt petals through snow crust, A letter arrived from Vienna via the dirigible consortium, an invitation for an in situ delegation to tour European centers of progressive sensorium research, all expenses paid, culminating in a formal gala where the miracles of multisensory civilization may be celebrated upon the world's stage. It was written with flowery respect, yet the subtext read clear: accept our courtship, or watch our courtship of your politicians. The council's votes split down the cane, progressionists for, preservationists against. As prefect, Núñez held tie-breaking authority. He stared at the parchment long into the night, the lamplight casting ragged silhouettes of his quill onto adobe wall. Finally, he signed approval on 3 terms. No commercial contracts would be discussed. The delegation would include equal numbers of blind and sighted members, and all lectures would be reciprocated by the inter-two sharing bead map pedagogy. The Europeans agreed on paper. The chosen delegates, Rumi Sol, for his bilingual charisma and ambivisual gifts, Lama Fawn, whose ankle wound had long since healed into a sure-footed stride, Dr. Valdez, as medical liaison, and Medina Sarate herself, insisted upon not as curiosity, but scholar. Her monograph on echo-based surveying had startled the Royal Geographical Society. Núñez remained to govern, though every fibre of him yearned for the fantastical voyage. On departure day, the airship settled like a gilt cloud. Rumi Sol boarded first, guiding his mother by elbow, describing gangway incline. She answered by inventorying wind vortices around envelope seams. Lama Fawn touched the hull's taut fabric, marveling that it thrummed like an enormous flute. The vessel ascended with a hiss, pivoting south then east across serrated cordilleras toward Guayaquil's naval mast, where it would hitch to a steamship bound for Europe. Núñez watched the Leviathan shrink until it vanished into beaten copper sunset. He had mailed them a letter sealed in wax. Remember the mountains hum beneath your ribs. Let no marble foyer drown it. Months passed, gilded by anticipation. Telegrams crackled across Atlantic cables. Vienna Congress applauds in situ phonetic knots. Berlin neurologists, astonished by Medina, Sarate's lecture on tactile, acoustic convergence. Parisian newspaper prints photograph of Rumi Sol demonstrating sonido ballon to lycée students. British sponsors propose funding a sensory conservatory on the plateau. Enthusiasm, to many at home, felt like dawn's promise. Then a telegram came truncated by censorship-marked cryptic. Delegation diverted. Berlin military demonstration urgent ethical concern standby. Days later, fragmentary radio relays. The German War Office had invited the in situ to observe a prototype sound-ranging apparatus for artillery detection, claiming their expertise indispensable. Reports hinted the device was an array of brass horns inspired directly by bead map click locators. Rumi Sol, it was said, had reluctantly provided foundational principles. Medina Sarate objected, but authorities invoked wartime urgency. Negotiations turned serrated. The delegation found itself compelled guests rather than courted allies. Back on the plateau, unease thickened. Father Dominguez prayed for pacific outcome. Jacob forged letters of protest to embassies. Carvajal wired newspapers. Núñez, sleepless, pored over international law volumes while snow gathered about his study window. A month later, another wireless, escaping Holland, border-safe but pursued visibility low, and then silence as though Atlantic swallowed signal. During the agonizing wait, the plateau endured its heaviest earthquake in years. No lava, only bone-deep shaking that cracked bathhouse tiles and toppled several torch towers. Brushers from Quito's engineering school arrived to advise reinforcement, but their presence magnified worry. Each stranger's footfall seemed echo of faraway perils. Finally, just as frost loosened its grip, a disheveled courier braved mountain roads bearing handwritten pages Medina Sarate's looping script. The tale unfurled breath by breath. After weeks of velvet captivity, they had slipped away with help of a Dutch Quaker charity, crossed North Sea in a fishing cutter, then shipped for Brazil aboard a neutral freighter. Now they would wind through Rio, Buenos Aires, up Andes via slow rail and mule. Arrival estimate: 2 months. The plateau exhaled relief tinged with fresh apprehension. Núñez mobilized preparation cruise pathways cleared, infirmary stocked, wind chimes tuned to welcome travelers by resonance code. Yet unease simmered. What knowledge, coerced or voluntary, had left Medina, Sarate's lips? Would armies weaponize echo maps? Newsprint brimmed with talk of hawks and howitzers. Diplomacy felt a soap bubble trembling before shrapnel. When at last the mule train appeared dawn, under a sky the milky green of glacier run off the plateau poured forth to greet them. Rumi Sol, beard now shadowing jaw, dismounted and knelt, pressing ear to ground in homage. Medina Sarate, thinner but eyes bright, embraced Núñez wordlessly. Lamathorn molded palms against bead rails, reacquainting them with home's signature vibration. Dr. Valdez coughed brackish harbour residue, yet smiled. That night the council gathered by roaring hearth. Delegates recounted deeds, scientific triumphs, velvet confinements, midnight flights. They admitted some principles of echo analysis were now in European military dossiers, yet equally. They had brought back blueprints for sonar-based avalanche monitors, a technology that could save countless mountain villages. Knowledge, it seemed, had 2 faces. Choice of mask lay in the wearer. Silence followed, thick as lava glass. Then Rumi Sol spoke. "We left as emissaries of promise," he said, voice hoarse. "We return as proof that promise and peril share a border no map can fence. We must teach faster than the world can twist what we teach." Debate burned till cocks crowed. At last a resolution. Nueva Institute would host an international collegium of sensory science open to all nations, yet governed by a charter rejecting martial applications. Research would publish simultaneously in every major language, granting no state monopoly. It was audacious, perhaps naive, but Wellesian audacity had always stalked Núñez's veins. Construction began that very spring. Amphitheaters carved into basalt, resonance chambers lined with cedar to dampen echo for control experiments, a tower of glass prisms channeling skylight into subterranean labs, so even blind researchers could feel sun warmth by conduction plates. Funding threaded a needle, partly from plateau baths, partly from Quaker pacifists, partly from South American universities alarmed by arms races. Grand opening drew luminaries. Japanese koto masters investigating vibrotherapy, Nigerian percussionists mapping heartbeat harmonics, Scandinavian architects designing earthquake-resilient dwellings tuned to frequency nodes. An unlikely coalition artist, doctor, physicist wandered bead paths with bells at waists, laughing when they missed a turn, awed that humility could be structured into a civic grid. But the world beyond did not still its cannons. On a crystalline June morning, wireless dispatch carried grim headline: Archduke assassinated, alliances stirring. Conscription drums thundered across oceans. The collegium's visitors debated cutting short their residencies. Some fled, others stayed, believing knowledge more essential than ever. Núñez's grandfather, prefect, host stood before a marble plaque freshly engraved with the collegium's credo: Scientia ad pacem, non ad ferrum, science for peace, not for iron. He felt the mountains' living hum beneath souls. War could shatter men, but here stone still sang. He vowed to shield that chord. One night, while ash moonlight limned rooftops, he and Medina Sarate walked the upper promenade. She paused, sensing in the wind a remote thrum unlike any natural tone. Zeppelin engines. Núñez guessed. Spycraft, maybe route. Mapping tropical jet streams. She held his arm a shade tighter. Sound travels before intent, she said. We must listen wider. They reached the vista where once they had gazed upon the lost lava-buried valley. Steam no longer rose. Lichen and tough grasses had claimed black rock, softening scars. From this vantage, Nueva Institute's lanterns twinkled like patient constellations, each flame a sentinel. Somewhere among those lights, Rumi Sol compiled curricula for the next cohort. Lama, Fawn tested a braille telegraph keyed by drumbeats. Father Dominguez annotated concordances between Gregorian chant and goat bell intervals. The future crouched on every roof, tile uncertain, perilous, yet glimmering. And Núñez, weary but unbowed, whispered against the night, "Let the world come with its noise. We have melody enough to answer." Autumn's first saffron leaves had barely begun to skitter across the basalt promenades when the Collegium received an unwelcome envoy. Captain Friedrich Halberstadt, naval acoustician to the German Empire, uniform, immaculate, monocle glinting like a sliver of glacier. He arrived not by airship, those sky giants were suddenly scarce in wartime, but by mule convoy, threaded with field sappers and crates marked meteorological instruments. His orders, politely cloaked, were plain. Secure exclusive counsel on subsurface echo mapping for detection of enemy U-boats. Núñez greeted him at the threshold where bead maps met cobblestone. The captain removed his cap with punctilious courtesy, yet his boots stamped an impatience that reverberated through the marble atrium. He presented letters from Quito's Foreign Office Ishaki, reluctant endorsements forced by alliance obligations. Behind him stood a transmitter engineer and an interpreter. The latter stared in fascination at the blind reception attendant, who guided visitors by scented ribbon rather than gaze. "Your institution," Halberstadt began, "possesses unparalleled understanding of sound propagation in irregular strata. Humanity's very freedom may hinge upon that knowledge. I request respectfully, but with urgency, technical consultations beginning tomorrow." Rumi Sol, summoned from a seminar on granular snowpack acoustics, arrived wind-tossed, carrying a sheaf of diagrams flecked with chalk dust. He heard the captain out, then replied in measured German, "Sir, the Collegium's charter forbids weapon application. We publish openly, so no single flag may twist truth into shrapnel." Halberstadt's lip thinned. Open publication was precisely what the Admiralty feared. He argued that Germany fought to protect civilization, that blockade strangled children. Rumi Sol countered that the blockade had been declared by Germany. Tensions snapped like an overstretched drumskin. That night the council convened under lantern glow. Voices interlaced. Some urged expelling the captain at dawn, others feared diplomatic retaliation. Medina Sarate sat silent until all arguments wove themselves into knots. Then she spoke, her tone steady as metronome clicks. "No guest of ours shall be harmed or humiliated," she ruled, "but no knowledge shall be hidden or hoarded. Let the captain attend tomorrow's lecture on volcanic resonance alongside journalists, farmers, and whosoever walks the mountain path. If he learns enough to twist steel into daggers, that is upon his conscience, not our secrecy." The motion carried, thin but firm. Halberstadt, apprised of the terms, frowned yet acquiesced. Better open crumbs than none. He sat through the lecture on spectral harmonics, scribbling fervently while shepherds yawned and artisans marveled. At recess he cornered Rumi Sol, offering enormous honorariums for private diagrams. Rumi Sol declined with cordial finality. The captain left after 3 days, his mule train slumping under untouched gold marks. Rumors later said he transferred to the Baltic, where winter ice strangled sonar cables before they could sing. War elsewhere swelled like a malignant tide. Refugees trickled over Andean, passes Belgians who had fled Congo plantations now fleeing Europe. German crop scientists refusing conscription, a Turkish photographer who had documented Armenian villages before they vanished. Nueva Institute offered them study posts, cottages, blankets spun from valley wool. In return, the newcomers taught clockwork maintenance, copper electroplating, even Arabic calligraphy whose curves reminded bead, students that symbols could flow as well as clack. But charity drew scrutiny. A Peruvian colonel, hearing talk of enemy nationals, sheltered near sensitive mountain corridors, dispatched a patrol to verify neutral status. The patrol arrived, bristling with Mausers, boots crunching crucifer beds. At the sight of rifles, blind field hands froze, ears filling with metallic thunder. Núñez intercepted the squad at the main canal, voice calm, yet unyielding. Papers were produced, signatures cross-referenced. The colonel's men left after 2 hours, taking nothing save the memory of a community that treated vision like just another dialect. Nevertheless, the incident galvanized fortress talk among younger progressionists. They argued for volunteer corps drilled in echo-based perimeter defense, perhaps armed with crossbows to avoid gunfire terrors. Preservationists objected. Any weapon eventually chooses its own target. The debate persisted through harvest, through first snows, until earthquake intervened in seconds of subterranean roar that toppled a bell tower and cracked the funicular's hall drum. In the distraction, martial debates cooled. Everyone grabbed shovels instead of crossbows. One casualty of the quake was the weather station mirrors shattered, anemometer twisted. While teams rebuilt, Rumisol proposed installing seismoacoustic transducers invented by a Serbian refugee engineer. The devices resembled shallow copper bowls half buried, wired to graphite styluses. They could translate sub-audible tremors into charcoal tracings on moving scrolls. Medina Sarate listened as the bowls hummed deep like whale song. She said they reminded her of the valley's old breathing. Dr. Valdez grinned. Now the mountain writes us letters before it shouts. Late winter delivered one such letter, a low, rhythmic pulse that crept across all 20 bowls for a full hour before subsiding. Núñez, consulting old lava maps, feared pressure building beneath the extinct vent. An emergency council voted partial evacuation of bathhouse guests and relocation of grain silos onto higher shelves. When no eruption followed, some mocked false alarm, but Medina Sarate reminded them that silence does not always equal safety. Meanwhile, telegraphs crackled with news of Zeppelin raids on London, of Verdun's meat grinder, of a new chlorine shell heavier than the air it murdered. Each headline tested the Collegium's creed. A French delegation begged for prototypes of the avalanche monitors to repurpose as trench listening gear. Their argument mirrored Halberstadt's: defensive, humane. Again, the council refused exclusivity but shipped blueprints to every belligerent, including the Austrians, the Italians, even the nascent Arab bureau in Cairo. Displeased diplomats muttered the plateau's neutrality was uncomfortably radical. Amid these storms, life's steady pulse persisted. Lila Chaska's daughters grew tall. The blind one, Inya, rose, excelled in harmonic cartography, drafting clay reliefs of echo density with fingertips. The sighted one, Clara, feather, apprenticed under a Swiss chemist studying lichens for antibiotic secrets. They bickered, laughed, finished each other's analogies, proving daily that divergence of senses need not splinter affection. Carvajal, whose hair thinned yet whose waist thickened, returned from Quito with a surprise. The government had completed a diverted rail spur to a point 15 kilometers south of Nueva Intitu, primarily to fetch anthracite from a mine below the plateau. The spur, if extended, could ease trade or usher in troop columns. Council studied maps. Jacob opined that locked doors also lock neighbors out. They petitioned for a cooperative freight agreement, permitting Intitu-operated wagons only. Negotiations dragged. Carvajal shuttled telegrams like shuttlecock until the Minister of Transport, weary of paper storms, accepted the clause. The first locomotive whistle echoing up the valleys startled condors but also brought casks of olive oil, paper reams, and rare earth magnets indispensable for the transducers. Spring blossomed, crimson chuquiraga ablaze on slopes. The Collegium prepared its inaugural symposium of harmonized perception. 8 days of demonstrations from vibro, braille poetry, to ultrasonic beetle navigation. Delegates from 4 continents arrived despite submarines and blockades. Among them an American named Dr. Sleef, Rachel Arkwright, wearing a cedar cane tipped with ivory. She was not blind, but had vowed never to study what she could not also feel. Her lecture on infrasonic architecture cathedral buttresses, tuned to earthquake frequencies, left the hall in reverent hush. She stayed on afterward, tutoring local masons. During the symposium's final night, while sky lanterns drifted like milky jellyfish against Empyrean black, Medina Sarate took the dais for the keynote. She spoke of the reciprocity of ignorance, how every sense both reveals and conceals, how civilizations err when they crown one faculty king. Empires, she said, are built by monocular men, but galaxies are charted by those who permit every wave to inform the map. Her voice carried beyond the amphitheater, bouncing off basalt cramps until even shepherd fires on distant ledges flickered in applause. 3 days later, news arrived of fresh horror. A fog of burning oil on the Somme, soldiers drowning, while the sky itself combusted. Rumisol spent that evening on the weather tower, listening to wind that had crossed oceans, wondering if any molecule drifting over his cheek had once passed through that charnel valley. That night he dreamt of the old lava plain swallowing armies, their helmets clanging as they sank. He woke before dawn, unsettled. As sun eked over peaks, a Zeppelin silhouette emerged unexpected, bearing Red Cross insignia. It moored at the funicular head, releasing medics and 20 blinded soldiers from disparate fronts: Belgian, Serb, Turk, even a gaunt German stretcher case. They had been gathered by international accord for special rehabilitation at the famed plateau. Captain Halberstadtno, eye-patch scarred, stood among them, cane-tapping. He greeted Rumisol with a wry half-bow. "I come not for war," he said, gesturing at the wounded. "Teach them what you would not teach me." The council faced a crucible: open gates to war's debris, or hold purity behind stone. Medina Sarate advocated acceptance. The mountain had always admitted the fallen. Jacob worried resources thin. Debate stretched till dusk, concluded with unanimous welcome. Convalescents were housed in the old quarry dormitory, overlooking Gentian meadows. Within weeks they learned bead paths, traded trench songs, and wrote joint letters pleading for ceasefire. Their presence became living exhibit of the world's blindness to its own pain. Summer matured. Zeppelin traffic, though rare, sometimes brought wounded, sometimes scholars. Never arms this the plateau enforced. The war dragged, languages collided. A greenhouse of empathy sprouted between men who days earlier would have shot each other across wire. Dr. Valdez compiled case studies. How tactile music therapy calmed shell shock when morphine failed. Dr. Arkwright built a small chapel with beams tuned to resonate at heart rest frequency. Its silent vibration felt beneath souls. Even Halberstadt, facial muscles still fierce, softened. He supervised a team adapting avalanchograph bowls into orientation devices for blinded resistance couriers across Europe. On an evening scented with rain-damp sage, Núñez slowed by a persistent cough sat by the stone sundial with Medina Sarate. He confessed weariness. "I journeyed here by accident so many years ago, hoping to map unknown edges. Now edges multiply faster than I can sketch." She placed a hand on his and guided the dial's gnomon to the faint lunar glow. "Edges are only beginnings seen from the wrong side," she said. "Rest, Jorge. The children carry torches now." Indeed, Rumisol and Inya Rose planned a joint expedition to the Amazon headwaters, intent on recording ultrasonic bat corridors and training local tribes to use bead maps for rainforest navigation. Clara Feather prepared to accompany Dr. Arkwright to Lima's quake-shattered barrios to test resilient housing. The torch had passed while Núñez watched, proud and fearful in equal measure. The war's final year ground bone into powder overseas. On the plateau, steam engines still chuffed, yet supply telegrams faltered. Influenza rumors rode static, laced wires. A directive from Quito urged quarantine for arriving trains. The council voted immediate lockdown. Bathhouse closed, airfield mooring mast unrigged. Despite measures, the virus hitchhiked in on a batch of quinine crates. Within a fortnight, the infirmary overflowed. Blind healers and sighted chemists worked side by side distilling eucalyptus inhalants. Medina Sarate soothed fevers with humming vibrations, tuning voices to crackle mucus. Still lives extinguished 12 villagers, 4 refugees, even Father Dominguez, whose bell had rung through earthquakes. His requiem, sung outdoors to minimize contagion, braided Latin chant with Quechua lament. Núñez, though aged and susceptible, tended fires near the sick. The physician begged him to rest. He refused until Medina Sarate herself led him from the ward, tears silvering lashes at what stubborn love could cost. The influenza ebbed, sparing many but stealing vigor from the prefect. Weeks later, while listening to Rumi Sol propose a seismic early warning network, Núñez's heart stuttered. He felt the room tilt, voices receding into a tunnel of light and echo. He collapsed into Medina Sarate's arms, a smile ghosting across lips, as if he recognized the melody carrying him onward. They laid him to rest on the ridge, overlooking both the buried valley and the new town between 2 worlds he had helped bind. Sighted mourners marked the grave with a modest obsidian slab. Blind mourners placed a ring of resonant stones that chimed when wind curled from the west. Medina Sarate spoke no eulogy, only stood palms open, letting breeze phrase memories in her hair. After the burial, Rumi Sol found among his father's effects a slim leather journal, the final pages blank, save a penciled note. For the children to finish, Rumi Sol placed the journal in the Collegium library with 6 pencils tied by red thread. Visiting students would one day fill those pages with equations, poems, or maybe just fingerprints of awe. Winter thaw heralded armistice whispers abroad. Cannon silence, borders redrawn. Halberstadt prepared to depart, taking with him trunks of rehabilitation protocols to present to the new Weimar clinics. At the station, he removed his cap, revealing snow-white scalp scar. "You did what shells could not," he told Medina Sarate. "You blinded me to war," she answered by pressing into his palm a small clay bell. "Ring it. When peace grows dim." Rumi Sol's Amazon expedition departed days later, a caravan of llamas laden with sonar bowls and mosquito nets. Inya Rose rode at the vanguard. Though blind, she mapped the jungle by hiss of cicadas and splash of arroyo stones. Clara feather-waved linen handkerchief from locomotive platform, destined for Lima. Dr. Arkwright scribbled excited notes on vibrational masonry. Medina Sarate watched them recede, her face neither sorrowful nor exultant, but poised like a cliff greeting wind. One twilight she climbed alone to the uppermost spur where Núñez once recorded star charts. The sky unfurled obsidian velvet, planets pricking through. She closed eyes, inhaled the hush where sight and sound reconcile. In that hush, she sensed the mountain's abiding hum, and braided within it, Jorge's heartbeat echo-faint, dispersed, yet irrevocably part of the lithic choir. She opened her eyes to darkness, she could not see yet recognized, and she whispered, "We are all half-blind, half-sighted, wholly unfinished." Her words, borne by thermals, glided into night. Far below, Nueva Institute's lanterns winked like mindful fireflies, a living Morse that spelled no triumphal creed, only the ceaseless question poised at civilization's frontier. And as wind brushed bead maps, and basalt chimed, and children in dormitories practicing multisensory arithmetic murmured answers they would refine tomorrow, the hidden proverb unraveled once merino, longer a matter of kings, but of companions steering through the dim with wave and spark and fragile, stubborn hope. The rains returned with Amazonian vigor that spring, drumming wide silver threads through mountain air, until every pebble rang faint drumbeats underfoot. Nueva Institute's terraces drank the bounty, quinoa heads swelled amber, and the bathhouse steams thickened, their mineral curls ghosting over cedar roofs and roped funicular. The town seemed to breathe with fresh lungs, yet absence fluttered in its pulse rooms, where Núñez's laughter once ricocheted, now caught only wind and the soft click of bead path walkers. Medina Sarate filled the quiet with motion, At dawn, she climbed to the Collegium's glass tower, where she tuned its resonance plates so precisely that the building's timber skeleton settled into a shy, harmonic hum. At noon, she taught apprentice guides, blind and sighted alike, how to modulate welcome bells for travelers whose footsteps hinted at uncertainty. At dusk, she walked alone to the obsidian slab and pressed her ear to it, not seeking reply, only sharing breath. One evening, as first fireflies stitched errant emerald arcs in the grasses, a wire arrived from Rio Negro. Expedition progressing, extraordinary sonar corridor shelf sound return midsummer. Signed by Rumi Soul, the message made her heart widen like a struck gong. She carried it to Council Hall, where Jacob, shoulders stooped, yet eyes bright behind cataract films, tapped approval on the staff's hollow. Festivals would greet the explorers. Until midsummer, days unfolded in measured chords. Refugee artists painted tactile murals across bathhouse walls, raised whirlpools and lava flows that sighted visitors adored and blind children read like rolling stories. The seismoacoustic net warned twice of minor slumps on distant ridges. Parties were dispatched. No harm came. Grain yields promised plenty. The infirmary's convalescent sons war, shattered now, worked as potters, shaping therapeutic bowls whose interior ridges stirred broth into fragrant vortices.